Welcome back to the Senior Hour. I'm Barbara Cochran with my co-host, Dr. Jean Dorio, on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. And we're speaking with Dr. Thomas Polucki, a local chiropractor, who's a very different kind of chiropractor.
Yeah, for starters, no twisting and cracking.
That's exactly right, and that's really appreciated.
Right, and that kind of gets people in the conversation of, well, wait a second. If you don't twist or crack, how are you a chiropractor?
Yes,
and
that's right.
As long as it's an open conversation, I can explain to them, what the goal of chiropractic is and how it can apply to their concerns. More than anything, I am concerned about brain function and access the feedback mechanisms between the brain and the rest of the body, both electrically with sensor feedback from the joints, which in the neck are thousands of times more rich than anywhere else in the body. And that is it. Just to give you an idea, it takes 40 inputs from the from the spinal cord, from sensors in the spinal joints themselves, to make one output message to control any function in your body, whether it be a chemical balance, an organ function, a response in your immune system. But you need 40 inputs to give one message back out to the body. And if those joint complexes that are feeding the electrical, literally the energy that your brain runs on, if any of that is compromised, every system in your body is compromised.
Interesting. Well, before we get back to our original subject matter, so what you're saying, well, for me particularly, you start at the lower of my back and work your way up.
Any one of those joint sensors can be impaired. I'm not a twist and crack chiropractor, as you know, as you've experienced. It is a very precise and very gentle technique that recalibrates the sensors in the joints more so than trying to wrench a bone into position. So when you're pushing on my back, and sometimes I feel like I'm going to go right through the table, but then it causes movement. Yes.
And I can occasionally hear cracking.
Occasionally there will be. That is not my goal.
It's not very often, though.
It's not very often, and it shouldn't. Typically that is a byproduct and not necessary to the correction at all. I am not a chiropractor that believes that the crack is the adjustment. In fact, very much the opposite. I'm looking to restore normal joint function, and I have measurements to determine mostly balance and coordination, and the muscle tone more than anything else is giving me immediate feedback. I can change someone's posture instantaneously.
Well, it's interesting because when I come in, you usually have me stand there and you gauge whether or not I'm
it's a
even. Measured
posture. It is a posture measurement.
And then depending on how that goes, then with the pushing and it's gentle maneuvering of your hands all the way up through my neck, because that's been my biggest problem lately, is my neck.
Sure.
But it feels better after the treatment.
Well, that's good. And again, that's a byproduct of the treatments. This is not an alternative to massage or an alternative to a physical therapy. Although you do get the byproducts that you're looking for, which is, in many cases, if not instantaneous relief, you do ultimately get relief. My goal is to restore the way your body is trying to work. And the only reason that you have pain or any symptom in your body is because something isn't working right. And with my understanding of the way that things are supposed to work right in your body, all you have to do is restore the feedback loops into the brain, and it can make better choices on how to correct whatever is going on.
Well, that's interesting. So how does it relate to what we're talking about?
Well, here's the
Alzheimer's?
interesting thing. Indirectly, because none of these gentlemen were chiropractors, I'm not really quite sure about their individual feelings on chiropractic. I know for a fact I was the only chiropractor in the audience, because these people don't normally associate with chiropractors. The interesting thing, however, was they were talking more my language than they were talking conventional medicine.
But
They
you're
just
not-
don't realize that
Yeah.
we are absolutely on the same team.
That's right, but you're not a conventional chiropractor.
Well, that too.
because you are more interested in the whole body, the health of the whole
Functional
body.
medicine.
Yes, that's right.
And the connection between the physical and the psychological,
Right.
which
Right.
is huge.
Sure.
which
Oh, it
most
is.
medical doctors do not have that claim to.
Yeah, it was surprising because at my table, I was also sitting at this one chair over from me was a cardiologist in Beverly Hills who is operating outside of the system, so to speak. He doesn't take insurance. His largest group of patients are cardiologists from Cedars-Sinai and the surrounding area. His first visit can run upwards of $10,000 because he doesn't care what it takes to treat that patient, and he's not locked into, oh, well, insurance is only going to cover this, and if you want, you have to give this diagnosis, and you have to use this drug in order to treat this named condition, and so on and so forth. He got out of that. When you get to the higher levels of medicine, when you can name your own price, you will not tolerate the restrictions that are put on most doctors anymore.
That locked-in problem that we see all the time. You know, because that's, right down the road, 95% of the physicians are going that road.
Do you want to
right
get
now.
paid? Do you want your patient to be able to get some kind of treatment? Well, then you have to play by the rules.
Yeah, and the rules that are not made up by the doctors.
No.
The rules made up by insurance companies, hospitals, and those outside people who are probably gaming the system.
Oh, yeah. So it was interesting to talk. We went out to lunch after we saw Professor Bredesen, and we were talking the same language. I mean, the only difference between this cardiologist in Beverly Hills and myself were that he doesn't adjust. Outside of that, we share the same protocols, the same methodology of working up a patient and figuring out what is absolutely necessary for that patient. And it was so refreshing to find that in someone like that, a world-renowned cardiologist, is talking my language, and it was just very eye-opening.
But it's outside the box thinking, though.
Yeah.
This is, Thomas, this is what we're looking at. And, honestly, we're not going to move forward when we don't think outside the box. Those who have move us forward. That's just the way it's always been. So that's what I always look for. And, you have that quality in you and the character to say, I'm not going to stay locked in anymore. I'm moving forward.
And I've paid my dues for it.
Yeah, they come after you for that.
It's so much easier just to play the game. And so many people...
Like I say, 95% of my colleagues play the game.
It's exactly
they play it
the
at
same.
the hospital. They play it with the AMA and the California Medical Association. That's the game that they're going to play because there's no choice. They're locked in with the costs of their education that they're still paying off, the mortgages that they might have, the office personnel that they're trying to support as well. They don't have a choice in this. Society doesn't get that either.
Right.
That's the bad part. And what happens when the doctors are locked in? Then the patients are locked in.
Yep.
You're absolutely right. But let's go back to the subject of Alzheimer's. And we were talking in the first half about how we live as a person, and starting from an early age has an impact on what happens as we get older as far as it relates to Alzheimer's.
Absolutely. And I believe with the absolute I mean, just explosion of the myth that there is ever going to be a one pill kill for Alzheimer's. It is impossible.
I mean, they're trying to do that to make us pay for it, right?
They have to.
That's where we are.
That's the only way research gets funded, if it's somebody at the end of this is going to get some money because their product is now recognized as an answer to this problem.
And society has been inculcated with this idea that this is the way it's going to work.
Yeah.
And when you see the commercials on television in the evening time, they're all medication commercials. Take a pill and you're going to be better. And we have to mold ourselves and be outside that box to be able to say, no, we have to think further.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I have a lot of friends who absolutely don't take pills. And they firmly believe that how you live your life and what you eat and drink and what you put into your body plays a big part of how you're going to end up as in your senior years.
Absolutely.
And it starts from very young education.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. So there is a hierarchy in that as well, which most people maybe have a vagary about, but I make it very clear. Step number one, which gets the most attention, is the food you eat.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But
No
let me put this into perspective, because this is kind of important, this hierarchy. So you could go 30 days, give or take. Some people much more than that, but you could go 30 days without eating anything at all. So yes, it's important. Your food choices are critically important, and there's a whole science behind that conventional nutrition doesn't even touch on. But that's a whole nother show.
Yes, that's true.
However, you could only last 3 days, not 30 days. So it's 10 times more important without water. So your fluid, your volume, your water component is 10 times more important to you in a real, this is not theoretical, this is real nuts and bolts physiology. Water is 10 times more important than the food you eat. When you boil it down to, okay, we have to make choices here. You've got 3 days to find water. It can take you up to a month to find food. It's much more important. Then the area that most people don't consider is you've only got 3 minutes to get some air. So where we're being exposed to the most amount of insults, where it's most critical to get this formulation right, nobody's paying attention to. And the researchers, the brain researchers that I spent last weekend with, are saying that nearly 80% of the insults that happen to the brain are coming through our noses.
Air pollution.
Air pollution. Wow.
Most of the irritation, most of the factors that lead to compromised neurological function, they're saying that most of those noxious components are in the air that we breathe. Not in the water, not in the food, although they all play contributing factors.
Sure.
So you got 3 minutes to find oxygen, or air as we know it. So this is thousands of times more important than the food that you eat. Now here's something that nobody, unless you're a brain researcher, considers. Literally, the clinical definition of life and death, the delineation point, is, as Dr. Dorio is going to a symposium in a couple of weeks, electrical activity in the brain. This is the clinical, legal definition of, is a person alive or not? Barring all spiritual and religious connotations, when you determine that there is no longer electrical activity in the brain, that is the legal definition of life and death at this point in our understanding of the way things work. That is an instantaneous thing, and it doesn't matter if there's electrical activity in the brain unless that electrical activity in the brain can do something and manifest in the body.
Right.
So on an instant-to-instant basis, life as we know it is the communication between brain and body. Millions of times more important than the food you eat. This is why I am the kind of chiropractor that I am, that I don't necessarily treat aches and pains and sprains and tape ankles and, massage muscles and give people anti-inflammatories, natural or otherwise. Is that my prime objective for every patient that walks through my door, regardless of what their symptomatology is to improve brain function. Because if you get that working right, you have the best doctor on the planet. The doctor that, whether you believe was created supernaturally or evolved over the millennia or eons, better doctor than anybody working right now, by far. Better able at making the decisions necessary to restore any case of remission, any case of cure, is when that system is restored to normal. And it doesn't happen because of the intervention. It happens because something was given a break long enough that it was able to reboot the system and start working normally again. So I go straight to that step. I'm looking, how can I measure what kind of disaffrontation, disautonomination is happening in the body? How can I measure that? How can I look at this person and see that they are out of balance, that they are being short-circuited somewhere in that system? And how can I measurably treat it and see the response in real time, so that I know that that brain is now in control of this situation, that brain that is better than any professor out there right now, is taking care of the problem, and I can walk away and not have to stay up on the latest coding for insurance, the latest miracle drug this week that will turn out a class action suit next year. I don't have to be concerned about any of that stuff, which unfortunately consumes most doctors' time.
Right.
All the time. That's right. But, our listeners, since the beginning of this show, the Senior Hour, when we talked about Alzheimer's and memory problems, they kind of hooked on to what I think we were saying. There's testing available, but how do you get that testing done? And especially the kids, that sandwich generation who's seeing their parent right now maybe having some memory problems, they want to say, well, let's get some testing done.
Sure.
How do we, is there anyone now other than going down to UCLA and getting into their aging clinic?
I am getting certified in this. This is my next I'm a certificate collector. So I will be certified in this. I will have access to these labs eventually. I don't know. I know it is ridiculously expensive, and for the overwhelming majority of people, unless you've got the highest level of insurance, you're not going to be a candidate for this type of testing. So I don't think that's realistic. There are certainly questionnaires that we are using, and there are some certain hallmarks that are showing that this is going to be a real issue, if not presently, in the near future. And that is one of the big ones that that kept getting thrown around this weekend was getting lost in familiar circumstances. As soon as you're unaware of spatial relationships, like if you can't find your way to the bathroom or to your favorite store, or all of a sudden you just wake up and you're like, where am I? This is a big red flag that the disease, the condition is already well established.
Whoa. That's really something to think about.
Especially if you've gotten lost recently.
Well,
Makes you think a little bit more.
It's interesting because everyone keeps telling me, well, as you get older, your brain doesn't function as well, and you do forget things.
Not necessarily. That is a sign of a atrophic nuclei of the gray matter, which is what we're measuring in the neuroquant.
Interesting.
And it shows up much earlier than anything else. Most of the studies done on the disease Alzheimer's, the age group starts in the late 60s. For this disease research, we're finding atrophic nuclei in the 30s.
And you call it atrial
No.
What was that?
Atrophic
Atrophic
nuclei.
Okay.
Literally, brain matter is shrinking. Atrophic nuclei of the gray matter is what the neuroquant measures.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but they measure it by volume. You can't do it by weight, but they
No.
measure it by volume. How interesting.
Whoa, this is interesting.
So when we come back
Yes.
and at the final part, we'll, try to put this all together and, quantitate this to a higher amount so that we don't start losing any nuclei as well. But it's a great conversation.
Always.
It's an interesting conversation. We're going to take a break. I'm Dr. Gene Dorio with my co-host Barbara Cochran on your hometown station AM 1220 KHTS.
Welcome back to the Senior Hour. I'm Barbara Cochran with my co-host, Dr. Gene Dorio, on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS. And we're still talking with Dr. Thomas Polucki, and we've really hit on some very, very interesting subject matter.
Especially atrophic nuclei.
Yeah.
Yes.
That to me is pretty heavy duty, but when you understand atrophic, it means that it's not functioning, it's contracted. And when you realize that the testing that they're doing out there in the future will be to figure out the volume of these nuclei, and knowing that there's less, it's atrophic, it's less, and you could then make diagnoses from that.
Decades before symptoms show up.
Absolutely. So, we're talking about doing scans beforehand to know what your volumes are, measuring that, and if you start to see elements of memory problems, then you can scan the person if they have those atrophic nuclei and their volume is down in those areas. If we know how to treat that area, we can enhance it and try to reverse it and bring it back.
Yeah.
How outstanding that is. But would you say that's Star Trek 6?
I don't know. The bottom line is this kind of research, as we've mentioned, is out of the box. It is not what it is going to get the government grants. It's not what the pharmaceutical companies are going to pay for and get into the universities. And the people who are doing this kind of work have my absolute admiration, because they are working outside of the system largely in order to try to get anything done, because there is so much wrong with the way that we do healthcare in this country right now, but that's a whole nother show. The key is living right, eating right, drinking water predominantly, making sure that you are breathing as clean air as possible. And that's a challenge here in Southern California.
Yes, it is.
And from my point of view, seeing someone who can actually measure these subtle imbalances in brain activity without a $10,000 functional MRI that can measure you in real time and see if you are physically out of balance and treat it right there on the spot and see an immediate change in that balance. And that's where I come in.
Wow. Great information for our seniors, our caregivers who are listening to the show. I mean, looking forward on the broad horizon, there's hope. And that's what we try to give to those listeners who are trying to make it through it right now, but we just don't know when it's going to be, do we, Thomas?
I don't.
Yeah, and I don't either. But we can't predict that. We can predict Barbara's next birthday.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
I'm going to make it to 85.
And
Then I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to make it to 90. And
There you
then
go.
95.
There you go.
And you guys are going to be around.
Yep.
Right.
You better be, because I'm
Yeah.
going to have another party.
That's right. No atrophic nuclei for Barb.
No.
Thomas Polucki, thanks for being on the show
Thank you.
again, bringing us all this information that is just enhances how we have this vision for life in the future. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We are sponsored by Advanced Audiology and Comfort Keepers in Home Care. Listen to us next week on the Senior Hour. Now go and enhance your quality of life.